Welcome to the GridMod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to the GridMod Pod. I am your host, Dr. Elizabeth Cook, and this episode we are kind of starting a special series where we're going to dive in deep into really the organization AEIC, which is the Association of Edison Illuminating Companies. And today we have a guest, Jim Vespalec, Director of Asset Management at ATC, where he is a former chair of the Electric Power Apparatus Committee. So we want to really dive in and kind of talk about what we call EPAC, which is a committee that is created of utility industry members to come talk about all things that we're going to jump in. So Jim, thank you for coming today and being our guest and helping us explore all about EPAC and what AEIC is up to. So why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself?
Well, thank you, Liz, very much. So I'm Jim Vespalec. As you said, I'm with ATC. Been in the utility industry for 30 plus years, a fairly long time. So I'm Director of Asset Management at our company, a lot of responsibility around equipment that's used on both the substation and transmission lines that we own and operate and maintain. And so as part of EPAC, as you mentioned, I'm a past chair, we create a forum for conversations between the utilities around equipment with the vendors, with research institutions like EPRI, et cetera. And so we have a lot of dialogue with the vendors about what our needs are in the industry and how we use equipment and trying to improve reliability and things of that nature.
For some of our maybe newbie listeners or people that have been listening to the GridMod Pod, one thing I think about AEIC, which we're going to explore as we get into the various episodes, is it is a utility membership organization, which means those that work in the utility and sign up to be a member have access to, we have 14 committees at this point, but EPAC is one of 14. Right. And something about GridMod that we talk about a lot is it's a very broad discussion because everything that's happening in the industry right now is changing. And that's the bulk generation, transmission, distribution, and then the customer. So the committees kind of like splice and dice all of those topics. And the particular one is EPAC. So I guess you being the Director of Asset Management is very poignant to this committee because you really do get into talking about the specific assets in more granular detail. So just to kind of give, you said that you were the former chair. So like, what is the structure of the EPAC committee?
Yeah, great question. So we have a chair, a vice chair, and a second vice chair. And eventually the vice chair will succeed the chair after a couple of years. And then we have an executive committee, which I'm also part of as a past chair to kind of support and help them a little bit. But the committee is made up of about 36 people in the industry. We also have a few advisors, which is a little unique on the committee. We have a member from EPRI. We have a few members that come from kind of the consulting world. But like I said, mostly about three dozen members from the utility space. At least a couple dozen of them are fairly active and regular attendees to our meetings.
And so in regards to the requirements to be a member, is there any particular action that needs to be taken? Like, they have to participate in 3 in-person meetings, or is there any kind of like structure in that respect? Or is it, what's the approach if somebody that's listening and is already an AIC member would like to be a part of that?
Great question. Yeah, we don't give them a test or make them read a
thesis.
thesis.
No tests. I think we should create tests. Okay.
Yeah. The sweet spot's kind of that manager, director, vice president level. So as long as they have some responsibility around engineering, planning, operations, equipment, that kind of space, I think they'll get a lot of benefit out of our committee. We don't require that they come to a number of different meetings to formally become a member. They just need to sign up, and we'll welcome them aboard.
And so from your experience, being a part of this organization, what benefits do you believe the members receive by being a part of this collaborative industry engagement?
It is a great opportunity to network, first and foremost. We also have a lot of dialogue, like I was saying earlier, with manufacturers. So we get to give them input on what it is we're seeing in our space and what we need from the vendors. And then we hear from the vendors as to what they're developing and what they're working on and the challenges that they're facing. I think all of us within the industry, like you mentioned, the changes that are going on, have seen issues with material lead times, especially going out. So just kind of understanding what's going on in that space is really important. So it really affords people a lot of, input or knowledge that they normally wouldn't hear elsewhere.
And I think it's important to, it's almost as if you have to be participating in it to kind of really understand the essence of it, because
Right.
there are a significant amount of industry engagements, and as you said, EPRI, various consultants can, participate in the meetings. There's ESIG, there's NATF, there's NRECA, right? And so these are at NARUC, and they're all large organizations that are effectively talking about these. But I think the differentiator is the collaboration. I'm asking if you're going to agree with your membership and your network, where you feel a safe space to really truly talk about these assets
Right.
in an open, transparent way, gives an opportunity to just talk about lessons learned and the moment in time that you're dealing with it. Whereas the other industry organizations are kind of looking in the 2, 3, 5, 7-year span. You guys are in charge of maintaining the grid 24/7, 365.
Right.
So having that cohesive engagement. So it's almost your dialogue can be an input or tremendous value to all of the other organizations that are driving various activities forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, at our meetings, we typically have like 25, maybe 35 at most. So it's a pretty intimate setting with the manufacturers, and get to see some upfront personal things that what they're working on, and they pretty much open the doors to us, which is really great.
And I think, what it's going to take is really that synergistic win-win-win conversation where the vendors, the utilities, and really our customers are actively participating, but realizing that this is a very meaty, technical, physical, like demanding machine, that you really have to understand it into the granular detail to really move things forward.
Right.
And just kind of looking over, and this is me being new to EPAC, I started my role as a DER, Distributed Energy Resource Committee member. But looking over kind of your past meetings, like what is the structure of like how you determine or create an agenda for your in-person meetings?
Sure. Well, EPAC is one of the oldest committees at AEIC. I think it dates back.
How old?
Well, I don't know if it dates back to the very beginning, but I believe it dates back to at least Thomas Edison era.
Yes.
So I don't know exact year, but it's pretty old.
Turn of the century.
Yes.
2 centuries ago.
Right. So the way we structure it is it's a collaborative approach to try to come up. So at our next meeting, we'll talk about what agenda item we should have for the following meeting. And typically there's 2 in-person meetings, spring and fall. So in the spring, we'll talk about what should we have on the agenda for fall, and start to figure out where we're going to go and what's going to be all about. And then we also have a number of spouses that join on these trips as well. We kind of call the committee behind the committee a little bit. They're pretty well engaged as their own separate group a little bit, and they'll give us a little feedback too. It's kind of a unique thing. I think it helps with the social aspect of the committee.
And typically, because you guys are Apparatus, you really pick a specific piece of equipment and then spend 2 days in that space per meeting.
Right. Yeah, so we'll do it a couple of different ways. We might pick a topic, let's say transformers, and we'll have our meeting just full of topics around transformers. Or what we might do is what we call a wall-to-wall. So we'll have a meeting with one vendor in particular, and we'll run the full gamut of what they offer. So, you can think of any number of large manufacturers, and they make a lot of different products. So we'll talk about all the different products. So there's a couple of different ways that we'll run our meetings.
And I think the next meeting, not to date the podcast, but is all about HVDC, which is a very high voltage direct current. So it's a transmission type level apparatus. And then the meeting prior was really circuit breakers, and you had significant collaborative conversation with various circuit breaker manufacturing groups.
Correct.
And, previously, as you said, transformers, and you kind of really determine from a membership engagement, like what pieces of equipment are of interest, and you're really kind of ensuring that you're ticking those off as you go through the
Right.
seasons.
Right.
So I guess now, going from all of your experience being in the industry and just shifting and just giving your perspective, what have you and how, like maybe a specific use case of how engaging in the committee allowed you to bring or create or, develop expertise or knowledge as you go back to ATC and kind of run the asset management group? Do you have any scenarios?
Yeah, there's a lot of different examples. We're all dealing with a lot of the same things within the industry. We're seeing kind of an explosion of the use of fax devices as an example, whether it's StatComs.
What is the fax?
Fax. Flexible AC. Yeah, I forget what the T stands for.
Transmission
system, something like that. FACTS, yes.
We're going to have I get it. That's a good
an acronym.
But it's power electronics.
Power electronics, correct.
Static VAR compensators, StatComs. So
SVCs,
immediate injection of VARs.
Correct. So we're all dealing with different things like that, or bulk storage battery systems. That's another one.
That's a big one.
Correct. So just hearing from the vendors and what they're doing and what they're developing helps me come back. So when we're having our conversations internally, I can connect the dots about, wait, this vendor's got, this device and they're coming up with this. So I can connect those dots and make those connections with our internal people.
Right. And just from my experience, I mean, the power of that, right? So one, the little grounding of lessons learned for those that don't know the utility space. You have a very large machine, and we can break it up into really 4 components: bulk generation, transmission, distribution, and customer. And now the customer, the edge, is now having an opportunity to have generation, not just being a sink. And the one key aspect to maintaining the stability of this massive machine is your voltage across all of your assets need to be within a certain range and running at 60 hertz. That is very complicated. So everyone per se is dealing with that phenomena and that capability. However, every state, every utility has their own, maybe they feel a little bit siloed or they're isolated because it is their assets that are running and are regulated and required to be safe, affordable, etc. And so just that acknowledgement that there's this very, I would say, robust conversation of individuals that are feeling the pangs of deploying a new device. Now, we talked about fax, and I'll just use that as an example. These devices really became available when power electronics, semiconductor theory, et cetera, exploded in the 70s. And then it was like the 80s and then the 90s that we started trickling those throughout. And what they ultimately do is, as you're maintaining your voltage across this massive machine, they provide this like instantaneous VAR injection or absorption to keep your voltage. And I'm just saying, like, for that is a necessary need that is identified in each individual bucket. But to bring that change into the engineering, the procurement, the design, the construction, and then into the operations room is a journey in itself. So what you guys get to talk about when you say you talk about stuff is literally those change management process, the learnings of how people are dealing with it, not only just the technical phenomenon of it. And as you said, now we're jumping right into battery energy storage systems. So another area, very robust. Everyone's kind of dealing with it at the same time. But again, if you're not exploring this large industry that we're all part of, you're really missing out. So in regards to the last couple of meetings, I know, your chair role actually participant to becoming a leader to now post-chair, kind of explore that, journey for you personally, and then how you would advise anyone that may be interested to take that road.
Yeah, so I think I had a unique perspective in that when I was chair, it started in 2020. And I think everybody recalls when COVID started. So we had plans to create a meeting offsite, or travel to Colorado, and that all fell through because COVID started. So my chairmanship, unfortunately, was all virtual, which is probably the first time in the history of the EPAC. which was kind of unique and different. But we managed to keep things going. We wanted to make sure that we had continuity with our committee, so we made sure to hold those meetings, and everybody sort of adapted to the virtual world and holding those meetings. But it's been fun being part of the ex-chair role and being on the executive committee and giving some advice to those that have followed me now. Juan Castaneda from Southern Cal Edison is our chair for the next 2 years. So he's going to be hosting his first meeting coming up in April. We're really looking forward to it, and should be a great meeting.
I also, coming from my experience in another committee, you find out about the committee, you join as a participant, and I think without knowing or using the words to kind of explain what's going on is the leaders. So as you mentioned, you have a chair, a vice chair, and a second chair.
Mm-hmm.
And you take, is it 2 years in each role?
2 years.
Roll into the next?
Yes.
And what, from your perspective, like being in each of those chairs, the idea is that you're kind of the leadership of the committee. So you kind of develop the agenda, do the correspondence, kind of what is all involved, I guess.
Yeah. So being a vice chair and a second vice chair is more or less a chance to be in a learning mode, to attend the executive committee and be part of the discussions as we go, to talk about what we're going to do and how we're going to organize things. Because things change so quickly, you might have somebody retire, and next thing you know, you're promoted faster than that 2 years was planned. But nonetheless, I think it's a good structure to get people sort of lined up to be that leader for the committee. I should mention too, we also have like a subcommittee within the EPAC around asset management. So outside of our 2 meetings that we meet in person per year, we also have a half a dozen meetings that we hold virtually around topics of interest. That's a great opportunity as well to hear what's going on and share things across the committee.
And that's another thing to kind of bring up with these committees and the kind of the benefit of it being member ran. It's, it's guided by what's currently happening in the industry that really percolates the ideas and the topics to the upfront, let's talk about it. And then as the years transition, the topics transition. But I would say, and I'm just going to maybe do another pitch for the idea, when you get into the forums, there's other user groups or specific tasks being, determined with a lot of our industry groups. I think unless you're saying it, you don't really know what's happening. But when the EPAC comes together and you're in the room as all leaders of an organization that's in charge of these very large pieces of asset, what really are the key takeaways, I think, is the people, right? The understanding what makes people tick, how to be that transformational leader in a space that's unknown. And so it's the shared stories, right? So when you talked about the in-person to the virtual, right? That was a big shift. And I think we're all dealing with it. Going from, can you create those tight-knit relationships with your peers if you're not meeting in person? And I guess, just thinking through, those moments at the coffee pot or during break or, the side conversations at your table, and you're sharing kind of real life experiences that I think are very important. And we don't talk about it enough, that that's the glue that then you have that story, that idea, and you take it back and you can share it with, your own personal team. So did you find that going from in-person to COVID, that was an essence, and was there anything creative, or did you guys really just kind of move through the meetings and now you're getting back to in-person?
We more or less moved through the meetings, I think, and getting back to in-person. Virtual is a great option so that people don't have to travel and gives them, that freedom. However, just trying to hear every word that's spoken and have those connections, it's a lot harder. So we really get a lot more, I think, out of those in-person meetings. And like you said, you go into the meeting, you might have a presentation from a vendor and you have a chance to interact with them. But then over lunch, you're talking to your utility peers and comparing notes on, well, what's your experience? Well, this is what we've had. So you get a lot more out of it than you would if it was just a virtual call.
Okay, well, this was great. And I think, It's informative. And just for your perspective, as we wrap up this conversation, what are some, to those that may have not participated in their first EPAC meeting and kind of, there is an open enrollment. So if you're engaged and you want to be more involved, what are some takeaways that you would guide that person to really kind of take the next jump and the benefit they'll get from it?
Well, the EPAC is a very welcoming committee. I would highly encourage people that are kind of in that space, as we talked about, dealing with the equipment and that, come see it, check it out, at least come to a meeting to find out what it's all about. I think they're going to find that they're going to connect with people that are peers in the industry that have similar things that they're dealing with. And I think they'll get a lot out of having those interactions.
I agree. And I guess I'll just say, AEIC has over 190 utility members. So
Wow,
if your
that's big.
utility is a member in one committee, you have access to all committees.
Right.
And I think I'm just going to wrap it up that, the importance of, yes, EPAC is Electric Power Apparatus Committee. It's industry leaders that are taking time out of their very busy schedule to get together and talk about these large pieces of infrastructure they're all in charge of. But it's a mindset shift knowing that each of these different devices that you're all experienced with 10, 20, 30 years in the industry
Right.
are being asked to think differently, look outside the box, and really embrace the change that's all around us. So it's almost paramount that we're using each other to really kind of create those conversations. Well, any last words, Jim, as we wrap it up?
Well, I just want to thank you again on highlighting EPAC. Again, it's been a great experience for me to be a part of it, and I'd love to welcome other people to join.
Great. With that, we'll wrap it up. And to our listeners, stay tuned to hear about all the other committees that are having AEIC as we continue to talk about all things grid mod.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.